Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. So just the other day I did a video using one of the Stamptember stamp sets by Hero Arts that had that gorgeous, like the silhouette images. And in that video I mentioned the Simon Says Stamp Wildflowers set as an alternative when the Hero Arts one sells out, which it's going to do soon. And then it got me thinking, and I was like, ooh, I haven't used this one in a little while. Let's pull it out again. So I've already done videos using this set, but I like to do as many videos possible, you know, pulling out the oldies but goodies. So I pulled the set out, and I'm using it with this week's Color Throwdown Challenge, which I've had, you know, just waiting for the time to film. And I thought the colors for it would be really perfect with these images because it's colors I don't use very often. I don't do a lot of blue for whatever reason. I don't know what it is. I love blue, and yet I don't craft with it often. So I started with BRISTOL Smooth cardstock, and I'm using my Creative Corners by the MISTI here, just that L-shaped ruler, so that I could have my cardstock kind of moved upwards a bit because these are really big stamps. So it just made it easier to line everything up. And then I have one of the stamps from the Wildflowers stamp set. Got that all lined up. I'd use my anti-static powder tool on the cardstock, and then I'm stamping the image with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. And then I'm going to clear heat emboss it. When I posted the other video, the Hero Arts one, someone had asked like why I don't just do all my ink blending and then stamp the image on top. You totally can. Like you totally could do all your ink blending or just create any sort of background you want and then stamp images like this on top. No problem. The only thing is if you would want to do any embossing, you would just have to make sure everything's really, really dry. Plus, I'm always scared too sometimes that it's like, ooh, I'll do all the work of the creating the background and then I'll mess it up when I stamp it. Because that's happened. So also the fact that I wanted to heat emboss these images because it gives them just that extra shine. So it's that kind of little extra step. I could just do the backgrounds and then stamp them. I wouldn't stamp and then just do the background without doing the heat embossing unless one, the stamped ink was completely dry because I'd be scared it would smear, especially on BRISTOL Smooth. And two, because I'm working with distress oxides to my background, because they have that pigment quality in it, they would, if I didn't clear heat emboss this black stamped image, the oxide ink would cover up a lot of it and dull it. So it would look chalky and muddy. So that's why I do the clear heat embossing, because that way I can wipe off any of the oxide ink. And then, you know, that black image remains black, plus it just has that little glossy extra. So I did the one card front, and then of course, because there's two stamps in the set, and I can never not do, you know, both, I did the other stamp, just switching the orientation of this one so it's a portrait. And I realized when I was doing this, I was like, that's kind of, I think, how they were intended anyway. You can stamp them either way, because both stamps are huge and will completely cover an A2 card front. But this way, the one is kind of taller and the other one is kind of a little bit shorter, you know? Anyway, so I stamped that one exact same way. Anti-static powder tool, stamped the image with the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, covered it with Simon's clear detail embossing powder, melted that with my heat tool. So then I set aside my MISTI, and I am working on my Waffle Flower Water Media Mat because it is just a godsend when you are blending inks. The silicone of the mat just seems to hold on to cardstock, so I don't need to like worry about trying to tape it down or hold it down or anything. It just kind of does that for me, so I don't have to put in as much effort like trying to hold down cardstock, which if you've done ink blending on just other surfaces, you'll know the minute you start doing it, the cardstock just starts flying all over the place. So with the silicone mat, I barely have to hold it down. It just stays. Plus, then I can just wipe up the ink when I'm done. So anywho, I used Blueprint Sketch Oxide ink, and then I added some weathered wood, which again, I wouldn't normally do this, but with the color challenge, it got me thinking, I was like, how can I incorporate a little bit more gray into this? And then I was like, oh, the gray in between the two blues might look really nice. Just give it that little something. And I'm really glad I did that because it just gave it an interesting little bit of a transition. So I went from the Blueprint Sketch into the weathered wood and then tumble glass. This took no time at all to do this ink blending. Just got the ink on there and it was done. Oh, and another reason I prefer stamping the image first is that gives me a visual guide where I want my inks to go. because I would have placed them in completely different places if I, didn't see where the stamps were, where the images were. It just, for me, I prefer doing the stamping first if I can, but other times I'll do it after. Personal preference. That's the beauty of it. So blended on the colors in the exact same way. Just this time I pulled the blueprint sketch up a little higher. And then once I was happy with these, cleaned off my media mat, laid these out, and then I'm going to, of course, splatter them with water. So I just use my little Nouveau splatter bottle, take out the nozzle here, and I'm just kind of flicking it against the background. And then I let this sit for 30 seconds or so, maybe a little bit longer. With these, and because I'm working Bristol Smooth and not like Distress watercolor paper, you get a different result. If I'd used Distress watercolor paper, which is what these inks are more meant for, I would have got a more intense result with the splatter. But with these, it was more intense on the blueprint sketch because it's such a deep color, and then it's lighter and a little hazier on the top, which is still fine. But I wanted more splatter. So after I removed the first layer with the paper towel, I just splattered them again with more water. And then I let this sit for longer. I let this sit for about a minute, roughly. And then same thing. Press the paper towel in there to pick up that water. Got more of that splatter effect. But then, of course, to intensify it, I'm going to add some Perfect Pearl powder because that just gives it so much shimmer and I love it. So I've got my Perfect Pearl powder in a mini mister bottle with water. So I just have to shake it up really well. And then I heavily splatter both of these backgrounds with that. I, shake it at them so I get the big splotches. But then I also flick it against my finger like you would with a toothbrush, that sort of thing. Just to get a really fine splatter as well. And then you'll kind of see more at the end of the video when I turn everything in the light, just how shimmery it is. So I let those completely dry. In fact, I let them dry overnight. Yeah, I let them dry overnight because Chris and I watched, what was it? Oh, Between Two Ferns on Netflix. So funny. I've watched those, the short episodes online on Funny or Die for years now. But yeah, we finally had a chance to watch it last night and it's so funny. So dumb, but so funny. I loved it. It was just good to relax and not really think for a while. So anyway, did that and then I came back to the cards. So everything, of course, was really good and dry. So I let everything dry. And then for my sentiments, I am using the Big Friend wafer die and the Thinking of You wafer die from Simon Says Stamp. And I am running those through my little Gemini Go here with black cardstock first. So I'm going to die cut 2 layers of each sentiment from black cardstock. And then I'm also going to use some Nouveau Cobalt Velour mirror card. This is satin mirror cardstock, and it's just, I flipped through my stash of all my glittery foiled cardstocks, came across this one. I was like, it's perfect. It's the perfect color. It's like blueprint sketch in a satin foil cardstock. That is the color. So it's just beautiful. So I die cut a layer of that, and then I stacked all these together. I just adhered all the layers together with some multimedia matte adhesive. So that I have the 2 layers of the black cardstock, and then the top layer is that Cobalt Velour cardstock. And then for my additional sentiments, I'm using the Say It All Friend stamp set from Simon. And the one I just stamped and white heat embossed onto a piece of black cardstock. The thank you sentiments, it'll say thank you friend. And then I die cut that with one of Simon's sentiment label wafer dies. So I'm going to adhere these to the card front with more of this multimedia matte adhesive. And with all of it, I kept setting my acrylic blocks on top of this because I'm adhering on top of something that's been clear heat embossed. And because it's clear heat embossing, not only does it repel ink, it almost repels a lot of adhesive. But as long as everything is flat and a little bit of pressure, it will adhere. So I adhered the sentiments with the multimedia matte, and then I would just set the acrylic blocks on there to make sure everything's pressed down, and then just let the adhesive dry. So on video right now, the sentiments kind of fade into these backgrounds, but because they have that little bit of metallic, they're not completely reflective, but because they have that bit of metallic, they actually, in real life, the color is just gorgeous. So you can see it there when I kind of tilted it. That's how it looks more in real life. You can actually see it. It's not just, floating there looking like there's nothing. So did the same thing with the second card. I adhered the Thinking of You to that one. So once I have all my sentiments adhered, I have to finish the insides of my cards. So I have my card bases, which are Simon's heavyweight white cardstock. So I've got one that is one that's landscape, one that's portrait. So the portrait one, I'm going to stamp the same stamp I'm going to use on the front of the card. And I'm going to ink these up with those same 3 Distress Oxide inks. So I started with my lightest, which was the Tumble Glass. And then I'm tapping on the Weathered Wood, trying to keep it on an angle, but was, you know, still managed to get a bunch of ink on the bottom, which I just kind of wiped off with a dry baby wipe. And then I'm going to add the Blueprint Sketch. But with this, you could really see the lines, you know, between the colors, and I didn't like the look of that. So I just took those same blending tools, because they still have tons of ink on them, and I just kind of tapped them along the edges to kind of blend it along. But then I also tapped it onto the stamp itself, because there are, you know, solid areas on these stamps, and that really smoothed out that ink, and I was just really impressed with how that worked. So I kind of went back and forth to blend the colors so it was more of a smooth transition between each color, and then also to kind of smooth out the ink on the rest of the stamp, and then stamp that down on the inside of the card, and it turned out perfectly. Pat myself on the back with that one, because I really like how it turned out. It just, the transition of the colors plus just this stamp, I was like, oh, again, these would make really nice card fronts. I need more hours in the day, because I could totally, you know, cut these down, make these into card fronts, but then I still need something on the inside of the cards. So stamp the image, added another sentiment from the Say It All Friend stamp set, stamped with the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. And then I did the exact same process with the other card. Just lined up the card base using my little creative corners in my MISTI, lined up the stamp, inked up the stamp with those same 3 inks in the exact same way, blended those inks together with my little mini blending tool sponges, so that I have that nice transition and just like smooth color. And then once that's all blended, I can stamp this onto the inside of the card. It turned out great as well. So then once that was stamped, I took another sentiment from the Say It All Friend stamp set, lined that up using that little creative corner ruler to make sure it was straight. And then I stamped that onto the inside of this card with that VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. So then once the insides are done, I can adhere the card fronts, and I just use Simon's Craft Tacky Glue to adhere these to the front of each card. So once I've got these adhered into place, and I'd cut them down to be slightly smaller than an A2 card front, so I've got that nice little white border around the edges. And then once those are adhered, I'm still making up for not using bling on that video I did with the 8 cards, 8 cards with the Simon October card kit that I didn't use any bling on. So I told you guys I'd make up for it. So I used 4 different types of bling on these 2 cards. I've got Studio Katia's iridescent butterflies, because they're just fabulous. I have iridescent butterflies. I have Studio Katia. All of these are Studio Katia. So I have iridescent butterflies, silver foil crystals, the September crystals, which again are like Blueprint Sketch in crystal form, and then Midnight Blue, which are like black with this like blue metallic sheen to them. They're beautiful. So I put those on all of the cards. So sprinkled them all throughout, added all those, you know, heavily as I do. And then once I was kind of happy with how many I had on each of these, I'm going to adhere them into place with more Craft Tacky Glue and my jewel picker. So just little dabs of that glue, pressing that down for each little crystal. And then once that is done, these cards are complete. So like I had mentioned, this is part of the Color Throwdown Challenge, which I will have linked in my blog post. In the description box below the video, I always link to my blog post, and then I always have a supply list and links to all the supplies used, etc. So you can check that out below if you're interested. And here you can see that shimmer from the splatter and the like gorgeousness of that cobalt velour cardstock. Love it. So links will be below if you're interested in checking all that out. Thank you guys so much for watching, subscribing, commenting, thumbs upping, all of it. I really, really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.